Our subject tonight, being karma and reincarnation, is one of enormous interest always to everyone, because we all have a sense of the progress of our lives and whether or not we have any capacity to influence our own destiny, whether we're just playthings in the hands of fate. Inevitably, when I give you a chance to ask questions, somebody's going to ask me how much free will we have, how much free will we don't have. I hate that question, but you can ask me if you want to, because it's a very, very difficult question to answer. I don't hate it, I don't hate anything, but it's a very hard question to answer. So I'm ready for it. Maybe I can do a little bit in advance to knock the legs out from under it when it finally comes, okay? When I was teaching karma and reincarnation in another city, I think it was in Chennai, or maybe somewhere else. I've been in India for about 7 weeks now. I gave the story of a music teacher who said when a student came to her knowing nothing about music, she charged the student $5 a lesson. When the student came in having had 5 years of lessons from another teacher, she charged him $10 a lesson, because not only did she have to teach everything that she needed, but she also had to undo all the damage that was done by the previous teacher, and it was much harder. My husband once talked his way into a job cooking in a restaurant, and he got the job over a man with 30 years experience for exactly the same reason. He certainly didn't have a chance, but the man preferred to hire someone that he could mold after his own liking. So now we have the question, when we teach karma in the West, it used to be a new idea. Now karma has become an English word. Just like so many, English has that way of just absorbing all your interesting words. And karma's been one of them, and the more commonly it's used in the West, the less it is understood. My favorite abuse of the word karma, although it wasn't even an abuse, it was just, look how popular the word has become. There's a series of novels, romantic novels, that are published and sold in the supermarkets in California and in America. They're called Harlequin romances. Very predictable stories. They're actually pretty nice, because the nice guy always gets the nice girl and the bad guy is always left out. So there's this picture on the front, and there's this woman, and she's, on one hand you see this sort of dark, handsome, sort of ominous looking fellow, and on the other hand you see some sort of frail, poetic person, and the woman in the middle looks totally torn. And then it says, was it Rebecca's karma to spend her life in misery with Harold? You know? I thought, well, we've made it into the mainstream. Here in this culture, where of course the concept of karma has been known for a long time, I find the misunderstandings are a little different. And the primary misunderstanding is, if I could generalize, would be a certain passivity and a certain just kind of resignation. Well, it's just my karma. It's very interesting how exactly the same words can be spoken, but intonation is everything. At a certain point on the spiritual path, it's a sign of maturing as a devotee, from saying, God, why did you do this to me? To, God, why did you do this to me? Exactly the same question, exactly the same words, but a universe of difference in the attitude. So when that simple phrase, well, I guess this is just my karma, can either be a complete letting go of energy and self-will and the power of magnetism, which is really essential for success both in our ordinary life and in our spiritual life, or it can be the beginning of true wisdom in this sense. Swami Kriyananda always speaks to us about the fact that you must work with things as they are, not continually try to work with things as you wish they were. Yogananda himself said something to Swamiji that in many ways is also one of Ananda's guiding principles, although it's less often mentioned. Usually Swamiji will say we have two. Where there is dharma, there is always victory, which is to say, if you adhere to the ways of righteousness, in the end, everything will come out the way you want it. When that end comes, maybe farther away than you like, but still it will always work out. The other is that the spiritual welfare of people is the primary responsibility of Ananda, not any external thing that we do. People are more important than things. But the third one is, and Master's words were to Swami, you have to be practical in your idealism, is how he put it. It's a very interesting phrase, because we have these very idealistic ideas about how the world ought to be. But if we're really going to accomplish anything, spiritually too, we have to be practical about it. We have to not just think in terms of the grandest ideas that we can imagine, but also what energy do we have at hand, what people, what resources in order to accomplish those. And actually, for those of you who have a more serious involvement with Ananda, which I know is many of you, that being practical in our idealism is something always to keep in mind. We think we're compromising sometimes, but we're not compromising at all. We're just being, well, quite simply practical. Swami Kriyananda is one of the most practical people I know. So when we start working with our personal lives, that's one of the issues that always has to come into play. We have to work with things as they are. And we might want to be something else, we might wish we were something else, we might be very frustrated with the way we actually are, but we're really never going to get from here to there without being practical about what the circumstances are that we're working in. Many years ago, I read an article in a popular psychology magazine, and it was called Perfectionist Script for Self-Defeat. That was the name of the article. I read it 35 years ago. And it was talking about how people who are not practical in their idealism, who are too perfectionist about what they expect about themselves, just set themselves up to say, I'm going to accomplish this. I'm going to be this kind of person. And they set a standard that has no relationship to their actual ability to achieve it. They fail consistently, and then they get to say, well, look at that, I failed again. And it somehow absolves us of the responsibility of the really hard work of going step by step. There's in the Bible, it says, if you have enough faith, you can move mountains. So there's a story of a man who looked out his kitchen window and there was a mountain there. And he said to the mountain, be ye moved. Then he went to bed, and he got up the next morning and he saw the mountain was still there, and he said, I knew you'd still be there. Just like that. Like, how much faith did he have? Now, karma often feels to us like a burden. It often feels to us like this force that somehow is preventing us from going where we want to go, or even sometimes where we need to go. And the beginning of understanding it properly is that it's, first of all, it's neither a burden or not a burden. It's simply the conditions under which we're living. It's the very definition of our reality. People ask, is this my karma? Is that my karma? Absolutely everything is our karma. Yesterday when I was talking about the chakras, and I was talking about how everything that we do registers at the appropriate chakra that represents the state of awareness of the action or the thought that we have generated with our own energy. And that over the course of a lifetime, and then over the course of many lifetimes, we build up an energetic pattern in our chakras, and that becomes the blueprint for everything that happens. That energy pattern is our karma, in this sense that it's the karma is the cause and effect in human life. We set up certain causes, and those causes have certain effects. If we consistently are impatient with people around us, and we speak rudely to them and we never take their realities into account, we will find that people will gradually distance themselves from us. If a wife constantly nags her husband, she will find after a period of time that he doesn't listen to her as carefully as he used to. A famous husband who happens to be my own said, I have a number of favorites. This was one of my favorites. Oh, if I actually listened to everything you said, I'd never have time to do anything else. You can see I have a lot of words, so I was more sympathetic than you might have expected. So ever since then, I do stop and I think, is this really of interest, or am I just talking? But we put out actions the way my friend Anandi explained it, which I thought was a really nice way. Well, let me go in a different direction with this first. Even though we have this phrase that everything is our karma and what happens to us is a consequence of actions that we put in the past, what makes karma so confusing to understand is often there is an apparent gap, sometimes an enormous gap, between when we put out an action and when the effect reaches us. If all karma was what we call instant karma, then it would be far easier to understand. In Autobiography of a Yogi, Master explains it this way, and this is one of his classic phrases worth remembering. He says, the karmic consequences of our own actions often are delayed because of the phrase he used, the thwarting cross currents of ego. And this is what that means. Even though we may be doing something that's going to eventually come back to us in a certain quality of energy, let's say negative, oftentimes we also have an enormous amount of positive force, or at least forward momentum going. Here's a way to think about it. Let's say a 12-year-old boy is a really unkind person, or maybe he's just the spoiled first child of a family and he's big, and he's just used to getting his way, and he's not by temperament considerate. And he likes exercising his power, and he has a lot of power, especially as a kid, over littler kids. So let's say he's driving his bicycle, his two-wheel bicycle down the road, and then there's some other kid who's smaller, like maybe a 4-year-old child who's on a 3-wheel bicycle. And that 4-year-old child's a little more tentative, and because the 12-year-old isn't all that nice, he's going forward and he sees the 3-year-old, he deliberately kind of knocks his bicycle into the little kid's bicycle, knocks over the little kid begins to cry, but the 12-year-old just sails right on past. Now, the 12-year-old has set in motion the karma of using his strength in a negative way. But he has a lot of strength, so he also has a lot of forward momentum. So even though the small child is furious with him, the small child can't do anything about it. But the energy has been planted. And now what that energy is that the 12-year-old, who's fully responsible for his actions, even though he's only 12, has a misunderstanding about what right action is. He has a misunderstanding about the purpose of his life. Many people have a misunderstanding about the purpose of their lives. They gather a certain amount of energy, and then they begin to use that energy to satisfy a whole series of impulses that are not necessarily in their own best interest, but they don't necessarily know that. People are always satisfying impulses that are not in their own best interest. One may have a passion for ice cream that one overindulges. One may drink too much coffee. One may have much more serious vices. One may be subject to sexual temptation. One may spend more money than one can practically spend. One may have an impulse to say mean things to other people, either because one has pain in one's own heart and you imagine if you pass it on somehow it'll help, or we're at the level where we think that if we can control everyone around us, then we'll feel better. So we consistently do things that do not ultimately bring us the result that we are hoping to have them bring, but we don't understand yet that the cause and effect relationship is not what we want it to be. We only ever do anything because somehow we think it will increase our happiness and decrease our suffering. But we often have an extremely narrow, limited, and often absolutely wrong idea of what will increase our happiness and what will decrease our suffering. Children often are very inconsiderate of their parents. Parents are often too controlling of their children. Women are often too indulgent of their moods and emotions. Men are often too distant from their own feelings. People sometimes spend too much time earning money and not enough time working on other aspects of life. Lots and lots and lots of issues where we think we're doing a good thing, but in the end it doesn't turn out to be quite what it ought to be. Karma, another word for karma, besides cause and effect, is unlearned lessons. That God wants us to be in perfect attunement with Satchidananda. He wants us at all times to be a perfect manifestation of one of his 8 manifestations: love, joy, peace, calmness, wisdom, the divine light, the infinite sound of Om, and the power and the energy that is our birthright. But instead, we constrict ourselves we narrow the channel of our potential, we grip these limited misunderstandings, and we keep acting in such a way that we prevent ourselves from realizing our full potential. That becomes our karma because we have set in motion a wrong action, and eventually we have to understand what the right action is. And so we act to do something that is not perfectly in tune with our infinite nature, and we commit ourselves to needing to come to an understanding of what the right action would be. Now, one of the reasons that karma gets complicated is because we tend not to take anybody else's word for it. We tend to believe that we tend to learn only from our own experience. I'm going to tell you a story which some of you may have heard already, but it was so dramatic and so ridiculous simultaneously in terms of teaching me this fact, because I counsel a lot of people and I try to help them see their own experience. But my husband and I often travel by car, and sometimes when I carry a small cloth satchel sort of thing. And I often, when I go out to the car, I'll try to set it on the hood of the car before I put things inside. For all the years that we've been married, which is more than 30, my husband would say, "Don't put it on the hood of the car because it'll scratch the hood of the car." I think this is a cloth bag or, a soft bag, but, he says so I don't. So once I was at Ananda Village, which is about 4 hours from our house, in the car, and I borrowed his car, which is much nicer than mine, and he keeps it really, really pristine. But I was by myself, so I took my 2 satchels and I put them on the hood of the car. Vaguely in my mind, he'd always been telling me this, but I mean, really, this is just a soft-sided bag. Then they were a little heavy, so I pulled them off the hood of the car, and by Jove, there were huge scratches on the hood of the car. And I was just like, so impressed. Look at that. This soft-sided satchel has a little tiny metal feet on it, and it will scratch the hood of the car. And as it happened, I was visiting Durga and Vidura and David, my husband, are very good friends. So I called Vidura out and I showed him how I'd scratched it. And I said, "I'm going to be home in about 4 hours. Sometime before I get home, would you telephone him and tell him what his car is going to look like when I get home?" I said, "Because the 2 of you will think it's funny." you'll be able to commiserate as old husbands, and it'll be, so it was perfect. And also Vidura made it seem like the car was just, was going to have to be completely refinished, which was very strategic. I didn't ask him to do that, but he, of his own intelligence, figured that out. So by the time we got there, and David just saw this big W scratched, and there wasn't really so bad at all. But for me, it was like, I have great respect for my husband. He's enormously practical. He has this mastery over the material world that I totally lack. I had every reason to believe that my satchel would scratch the hood of the car, but I never believed it till I scratched it. That's karma, right? That's why we reincarnate so many times. Everybody can tell you what the consequences of your own action are, but until you actually feel them, most of the time, it's not real to you. And even if you hear it said, and try to acquiesce. That's why dogmatic religion is not nearly as good as self-realization. Because if it's just a dogma that you've pasted onto yourself, you have to make it your own experience. You have to really know. So we have all these unlearned lessons. Well, the possessive parent will say, it's my duty to make sure that my adult child's life goes correctly. And the possessive parent may not understand that that everybody needs freedom, and that you have to really think about the welfare of the other person. And if even in the name of love, you're really just satisfying your own desires. People can tell you that, but then it's an unlearned lesson that you're going to have to come around and know. Maybe you're too attached to a strong, healthy body, and you define yourself only by the size of your body. I had a woman friend, very skinny person. I mean, just sort of almost an exaggeratedly skinny person, seemingly very, what's the word? Just not strong, feeble, that's the word. She looked feeble. The car she drove, she bought this huge four-wheel drive thing, just like she could barely see over the steering wheel. She looked ludicrous in that thing. And I sort of, at one point, said, she had, as it happened, a lot of money. Why did you choose this car? And she actually explained, she said, she believed that she'd been a fierce and strong soldier for many incarnations. And even though she had made this feeble body this time, in some effort to balance it, she just couldn't get rid of the self-image. So she went out to find the car that felt right to her. So she bought this thing for a man who would be 6'4" and 250 pounds, to drive. But she was having to learn, another way of moving through the world than the one that she had depended on all that time. So we have all these unlearned lessons, and they get postponed because of the thwarting cross currents of ego that mean that even as the lesson, as I think of it, is pursuing us to come back to our 12-year-old boy and our 4-year-old, so that boy whacks the little kid, goes on, and hardly even remembers it because he's a bit of a bully, and he whacks a lot of little kids, and he just does this. But then everybody grows up, and the bully becomes a semi-successful businessman, and the 4-year-old becomes a real successful businessman, right? And he finds himself in a position to say yes or no to the much-needed loan that the 12-year-old now needs, and the 4-year-old finds some really good reason why he can't give him the money. Now, maybe that doesn't even happen in this incarnation. Maybe it happens in another incarnation where this kind of irrational dislike of this man has been planted. But when they come together, the unlearned lesson of bullying, of taking advantage of other people's weaknesses, all of a sudden you find yourself in a position where you can't behave in that way anymore. Now, I think of it in a sense, an Australian boomerang that you send out, and people who can really throw those really well, they'll just send them way out, and they'll really look like they're going away from you and like they're never going to come back. But a lot of the karma that we send out is like a boomerang. We send it, and if we have a lot of force, You know, a person who's really strong and really knows how to do it can hurl that boomerang really far. So sometimes if we're moving through life with a lot of force, we may also be hurling energy that might not be in our own best interest, that might not be reflective of our own higher consciousness, but we're hurling it with so much force that it seems to move away from us. But we have all those boomerangs, and they're not all bad, bear in mind, but they're all just sort of on their trajectory, and they're going to come back to us. And what ties them to us, I mean, in the case of a boomerang, is because the man threw it, but he was the originating force, and it's connected to him. So we, because we have ego identification with our own actions, and that ego identification with our own actions ties the energy to us. And the energy must come back to us because it always has this thread of connection. Now here's the interesting aspect about the thwarting cross currents. The only purpose of this energy returning to us is so that we can learn whatever we didn't know when we launched it. I'm talking about, well, unlearned lessons, good karma. I mean, karma that's done selflessly is not an unlearned lesson. It's a different reality, but we'll come back to that. This is unlearned lessons. And it doesn't mean that every action is evil. It just, unlearned lessons can be loving beautifully, but not quite enough on a high enough level. You know, it can just be a higher and higher level of understanding. So when we send the boomerang out, depending how strong the thwarting cross currents of ego are, how strong the throw is, you might say, is how long it takes for it to come back to us. It's primarily the thwarting cross currents. That's what delays it. Because then the karmic pattern is not so simple and there's so much to be worked out. There's a lot of oscillating energy. But if time passes, we may actually have learned a great deal that we didn't know when that first karmic cause was sent out. And one of the things also that draws the karmic lesson back to us is that there is a resonance in our own vibration, resonating from the chakras, that still matches the resonance of that karma. If we stole someone's money and we're still stealing people's money, then there's going to be a resonance between these two realities. That resonance will cause that karma, when it comes back into us, to find a wide open portal, and it'll just come right at us again. In other words, if the lesson is fully unlearned. If, however, from the time one was stealing a lot of people's money, maybe some of the karma has already come back, and we've begun to understand how deeply distressing it is to be the object of people's financial dishonesty, or who knows what else we might have learned. So by the time some of those karmas begin to come back to us, we no longer resonate on the same vibration as those karmas. So they will hit us, they will find a much less open door. So they might hit us only slightly, or they might find the contrasting magnetism emanating from us has the effect on them like the atmosphere of the earth when a meteor comes in. That the karma will still come back to you, but it will be weakened substantially because you'll be neutralizing the vibrations by the positive force you're putting out now. So this is what we would call mitigated karma. And oftentimes, if you're putting a very optimistic spin on everything that happens to you, oh, I fell and broke my arm, but I felt like it was mitigated karma. I was supposed to break my neck, and all I broke was my arm. Or you cut your finger, and you think, well, it was an accident, but I could feel that there was worse energy, but it was mitigated by whatever the circumstances of my life. I'll add one more fabulously mitigating factor. The only purpose of all karma is to teach us to rely more on God, to attune more to God, to devote ourselves more to higher consciousness. That's the massive unlearned lesson. is we're committed to ego, we're committed to selfishness, instead of committed to a divine reality. So from the time one sends out a lot of this karma, one may become so devoted to God as to have become a disciple of a great master. And we talk about how the master will take on the karma of his disciples. And it would be exactly like this. Here comes the boomerang. And we've set the energy in motion, and it's tied to us, and it's our destined energy. But the guru says, oh, you don't really need to experience that now. It is no longer an unlearned lesson. And the guru will literally shelter you with his consciousness, just like an umbrella would be put up against the rain. Just if we take a little person and can hit a small person with a certain force, it may knock them over. That same force applied to a very large person may have no effect on them whatsoever. So the force field of your karma that may have caused you to become homeless or to become very ill or to lose people that were very close to you and then have to go through the whole cycle of recovering from that. But if you have already surrendered to God, if you are already a disciple, then you would just simply go through it. And the guru may say, no need, just like that. So what I'm saying by this is the way to deal with all karma is to become extremely aggressive, extremely intent and active in learning on the most fundamental level what all karma is meant to teach us. That we are loved and protected by God, that our lives are meant to be an instrument of divine blessing, that all selfishness does not bring us in the end the happiness that we want, that pure love is the answer, then whatever was an unlearned lesson, by the time it reaches you, it won't be anymore. And when we become simpler in our understanding of these things and more clear and relaxed, like, well, I'll use an example that Swami Kriyananda himself often tells. There's a karma that we call instant karma, where if you have reduced the thwarting cross currents of ego, then any little energy that's put out in the wrong direction is immediately balanced by whatever it needs to be, because you're not creating all this determined self-will that creates dissonance. Swami Kriyananda often talks about the motor home that he acquired at one point, a big house on wheels that he'd always wanted to have one of these, so that when he would travel around the United States giving lectures, he could always be in his own vibration and have his own space. I myself actually traveled around the US in a motorhome, and I understand why he loved it. It was perfect. You just pull the thing up to the front door of your lecture hall, and you step out of your own bedroom, and you give your lecture, and before they've even packed the books up, you're back in bed. You're back in your own place, and I would always be in bed with the covers pulled up under my chin by the time they put the boxes back in, and you're always at home. It's really a fabulous thing. So finally, a number of years ago, when he was going on a very long trip, a lecture tour, they bought a motorhome. And Swami describes it. He was so happy to have that. As he put it, he was skipping up and down the aisle, while they were driving down the highway, just enjoying it so completely. And even as he was doing that, he was thinking to himself, nothing in this world in and of itself gives us happiness. All happiness comes from God. And he watched himself enjoy it too much. Not that there can be too much joy by any means, but he was giving credit for that joy to the motorhome instead of giving credit to the divine within. And so not very long after, the driver of the motorhome left the thing in neutral, and it went imperceptibly forward and just came to a sudden stop like this, when it was seemingly parked, but it was actually rolling very slowly and then bumped against the side of a building. Didn't hurt anything, except perfectly in the moment that it's doing it. Swami Kriyananda was on one knee like this, in the most absolutely impossible position, and just at the moment it hit, he was completely off balance and he was thrown to the floor. He put out his hand to stop him and broke his finger. And just as the finger broke, he laughed even more joyously because it was so perfect. He said, I allowed this thing to define my happiness, so it was inevitable that it would have to cause me pain. And he could hardly play the guitar for the rest of the tour, but he just enjoyed it the whole time, because slight aberration comes right back. But you see, there's no thwarting cross-current of ego in instant karma. You just do the wrong thing. I'll tell you a story of my own instant karma that happened here in India. This is where it's really fabulous. When I first started coming to India, it was 1986, and Durga and Vidura, whom I mentioned earlier, friends of ours, and David and I, we'd bring Americans to India. I told you this last night. And over the course of 20 years, we came about 12 times or more. We brought 30 or 40 Americans every time. And we'd take them to the places made holy by autobiography of a yogi, and then we'd also visit other classical Indian sites. You know, I'm very at home in India, but I'm still American. I still sort of see the world through that culture, especially in those early years. So we were somewhere in Varanasi, and our guide convinced us that he wanted to take us to an ancient Durga temple. I think it's a very famous temple there, and a very ancient statue of Durga. But one of the characteristics of this statue is that it is really infested with a lot of monkeys. In fact, it's called the Monkey Temple also. So this was like our first or second trip. I was getting used to a lot of things that I have now become more comfortable with. So we're there at this temple, and it was not the cleanest of temples. I think it's hard to keep a temple clean that's infested with monkeys. But even where it should have been cleaner than it wasn't. And that was disturbing me. That's the kind of things that Westerners get upset about. And I was also having a little trouble just with all of the rituals of Hinduism. I was still trying to understand the relationship between Master's teachings and Hinduism. I hadn't chosen to come there. Our guide had more or less kidnapped the bus and brought us there. And there was there was a pujari who kept insisting that I wear a marigold garland that was a little bit past its prime, and so it had a rather pungent odor. I kept taking it off and leaving places, and he kept finding it and putting it back on me. It was not my best day. And then I'm looking at this old, very, very old statue of Durga and all the offerings and everything, and I was not being respectful. I just was thinking, this is not for me. What is all of this? And I stood in front of the image, and I wasn't respectful. Let's just leave it like that. And so I was just walking away thinking about this. I was like a minute away, and I just wasn't paying attention to anything, and I wasn't watching the monkeys. And I got like between two monkeys like this. This is like less than a minute after I had been rude to Durga, like this. I'm over here like this, and one of the monkeys just decided to take revenge on me, and he jumped on my back. My friend, apparently, I don't remember this, apparently I grabbed the monkey, very courageously. I grabbed the monkey and I threw it to the ground. I said, "Get off of me, you foul thing," just like that. And then the monkey took a hold of my dress, like this, and I'm still just fighting with this monkey. "Give it back, let go," like this. The monkey has very sharp teeth. Thank God it didn't take a bite of my leg, closed its teeth on my dress, and so when I pulled my dress back, there was a big, monkey mouth hole in my dress. By which point I'm screaming in this rather small temple, and I've attracted the attention of everybody, and they all rescue me from this. I'm perfectly relaxed. I mean, instant karma. You do not stand in front of an ancient image of Durga and think rude thoughts. It's not a good idea. A monkey will jump on your back and take a bite out of your skirt. I mean, it was just like perfect. And then when I went home, I went to the fabric store and I found an embroidered decal of a monkey, and I sewed it over that hole. I wore that skirt for years because it was always, don't cast aspersions on powerful things that you don't understand. But I was so grateful. Just seconds after I had had those really wrong thoughts, Divine Mother said, don't mess with me, you know, just like that. But I learned it, and I was very careful after that, ever after that. I mean, I can still, you know, think it would be nice if the pujari wouldn't put that garland around my neck, but don't cast aspersions on things you don't understand, like that. But other things are, you can't follow it. So you always have to be prepared for the fact that if this is coming to me, there's got to be a good reason, because it simply wouldn't happen otherwise. In another context, I was fiercely accused of a very, well, moderately dishonorable action. It wasn't like a terrible crime, but it was a moderately dishonorable thing that I hadn't done at all. I was absolutely innocent in this particular situation. But when I started really reflecting on it, I had to admit to myself that in fact I hadn't done it, but I was perfectly capable of having done it. You know, that in this particular case I was innocent, and in all probability I would not actually have gone that far, but the seeds of that wrong action were still in me. And it was fascinating to me just to sort of see that and realize I probably got away with this in the past. I probably have done exactly this in some past life and snuck through. So in this lifetime, it's just coming back to me. Now it's a false accusation, but there's a vibration in me that allowed that to come to me. Now that doesn't mean I'm a terrible person or anything like that. In fact, I can proudly say, look, I didn't actually even do this. You know, whatever it was that was part of my past, I'm not doing it anymore. But nonetheless, the lesson had to be emphasized. I used to have a recurring dream of a particular dishonorable action. And in the dream, it would sort of like, I would never actually dream doing the wrong thing, but I would dream the moment after. And the realization of just the horrible things that were going to happen to my life now that I had been dishonorable. And it would just be such an awful dream. And I would also be frantic because I couldn't understand how I could be so stupid as to have done this. And with such relief, I would wake up. And I feel many levels. One is that I'm always glad in the dream that even though apparently I could still do it in my dream, I immediately knew it was wrong. And also the fact that I must feel that, well, this is a mistake you made a lot, and now your subconscious wants to be very, very, very certain you don't go there again. Now, if we can just sort of be interested when things happen to us, instead of always trying to justify ourselves and say why we're innocent, with calm self-assurance, be curious as to how we might be guilty. Because very often the facts are wrong, but we have to look at something, the difference between the facts and the truth. In that particular instance where I was falsely accused, the facts were wrong. You know, somehow everybody became convinced of this reality and all the facts were wrong. And so my first inclination was to argue the facts. But then I could feel, no, there's a truth here, even if the facts are wrong. And I asserted my innocence, but only quietly. And I knew that the whole thing would blow over, which in fact it did very quickly. But it was more likely to blow over. All karma is more likely to blow over if you eagerly embrace the lesson. Because if a karmic lesson is coming to you with a great deal of strength, and your response to it is, well, I refused to learn it the last time, and I'm darn well not going to learn it this time either, all that we do is just set in motion for it to just roll on and on and on. Now, the thing is, we have to also understand that it's not always obvious what the lesson is. In my particular case, when I was dealing with the false accusation, I knew the lesson was not to defend myself. But sometimes the lesson is to defend yourself, because the unlearned lesson might be the fear of speaking out. The unlearned lesson might be a habit of just letting other people bully you. You know, it's not necessarily a good thing to let other people bully you. Sometimes the appropriate response is to stand up and say, I'm just not going to let you treat me that way anymore. Once in a particular situation, it came to Swami's attention that this woman had endured a very wrong action by her family member for many years in his opposition to her spiritual life. Every time she would meditate, he would turn the television on as loud as he could. And finally she decided he was not the husband for her. Swami's answer, just very quietly, he said, I wouldn't have put up with that for 15 minutes, is what he said. If someone opposed me on that level of something that's so important to me, I would just walk out the door. In Autobiography of a Yogi, there's the story of Master and his own father. And Master's father was a great devotee, but there was some misunderstanding, and Master's father brought to Master's attention some negative comment that had been made about Sri Yukteswar. And it wasn't even, Swami Kriyananda sort of elaborated on the incident. It wasn't even as if Master's father himself was endorsing it, but he brought it to Master's attention. But of course the implication was that there might be some truth in it. Master looked at his father, his own father, and said, physical birth is something, but divine birth is everything. If you say one more word against my guru, I disown you as my father forever. That was that. Now, he puts stories in there so that we'll also understand that the lesson, we have to ask ourselves very carefully, what is it about this situation that I don't understand? Because sometimes we want life just to be easy and nice. And the unlearned lesson is that we can't always have harmony. When Swami Kriyananda asked once a fairly challenging commitment from a young man, and the man's response was, but if I did that, sir, my mother would be deeply disappointed. And Swami just said very quietly, we must be prepared to disappoint our mothers. He said like that. He didn't mean that we should defy them unnecessarily. There was a young boy who came to Mount Washington to be a disciple of Master, and he came when he was 17, and his parents fiercely objected, and they took him back home. And then when he turned 18, he came back, because in America at 18 you have a legal freedom you don't have before that age. And when he came back this time, Master said to him, does your mother approve? He said, now she does. He said, that's good, but even if she hadn't, you should have come. You should have come like you did. So sometimes we have to defy convention and create disharmony. And sometimes what we have to do is we have to sacrifice our own desires for the welfare of others, or even for the comfort of others. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is the unlearned lesson? Not what is the circumstance, what is the convention, what is the social principle, what is the tradition of the family or the country. Really, none of that matters. We inhabit the body we inhabit because it's the precise vehicle for us to go to the limits of our potential consciousness and then push those limits beyond. In the Raja Yoga course, Swami has a little line about reincarnation in there. And it's so fascinating. He says, we manifest the body, and he's talking about non-human forms too, moving through the animal forms. Whatever the full potential of our consciousness is, we manifest a body that will allow us to express that. We manifest in circumstances that will allow us to express that. You know, you look at your cat, you look at your dog, and I know people have very sentimental feelings sometimes about how spiritually advanced their pets are. And all I can say is, I don't want to go there. Let's just forget that for a moment. But the potential of a cat or a dog to experience life is fundamentally limited. I mean, it's hard for young Indian men to get a visa, tourist visas, to go to America sometimes, and they have to work hard to get it. But a cat can't even apply, you know? He can't get a passport and decide he would like to experience other cultures. He doesn't even have the capacity to even imagine that there are other cultures. His life, however loving it might be, is extremely circumscribed. And so the individual consciousness will have all the experiences that are possible in that form. And when the limits of experience through that consciousness have been reached, whether it's many, many lifetimes as a cat, or a dog, or a hamster, or a mouse, or whatever it is, as soon as it's been reached, then that individuality will manifest a form that has more potential. And, or manifest in a place where that same form will have more potential. Human contact, it's very good for your pets to be with humans, because humans expand, or vibrate at a higher level than when animals are in the wild, where they just eat each other, run around and eat each other. When they live with human beings, they get another taste of it. So with us, we incarnate into a unique situation that will give us the full potential, potentially, to expand our consciousness. And then as soon as we've incarnated in this form, the process begins. Children are not innocent at all. They're just a fully evolved soul. It's a very important aspect of being a parent or having any association with children, is to not think because they're so darling, and they have such little tiny feet and hands, and they look so cute when you dress them all up, that somehow or another what is going on inside of them is any less sophisticated or completely evolved than everyone else. All they have is less capacity in their early years to express that full consciousness in the ways that others can understand. Swami Kriyananda talks about his own childhood and how he just was really much more in the astral world than in this world, really until about the age of 9. He just lived in the astral world. He said he would go to sleep at night. He also lived in the spiritual world. He'd go to sleep at night. This bright light would appear in front of him, and he would expand and expand his consciousness until he merged into that light. He thought everyone went to sleep that way. He was much older before he found out that most people went into subconsciousness, not superconsciousness. But that's just the world he lived in. It took him many years to find out that he was living in a different world than other people. And the beginning of his difficult years was when he really realized how different he was and tried to conform to this world a little bit. But we don't know how many children are doing that. In my Miracles and Answered Prayers book, there's a story contributed by an Indian woman who used to dream a previous incarnation every night, which was a very traumatic one. And she used to tell her parents, she was only 3, about her bad dreams, and they couldn't understand the magnitude of it for her because she was only 3. She couldn't explain it to them. But she was a fully conscious being living through it. So for us, to make our lives really what God intended them to be, we need to be wide awake at all times, using the full potential for consciousness that is inherent within us. People ask me sometimes, should I do this, should I do that? It really matters less what you're doing than how you're doing it. Are you 100% engaged? Are you always looking for ways to expand your consciousness in every situation that you're in? That's why this body was given to us. And that's the cycle of karma, is that what unlearned lessons am I going to be able to learn today? And we say, well, this is my karma. Maybe you really owe these people. I've been in relationships, I'm sure you have been too, where you can feel there's a karmic debt. Why do you put up with that from so-and-so? Well, I feel like I owe him something. Maybe I abandoned him in a certain lifetime. Who can say? And then at a certain point you'll feel that the debt is paid. And suddenly, that which seemed like what you had to do, suddenly you just don't have to do it anymore. It's just over for you. And another aspect of karma is that we really have to understand that merely because we had certain qualities in the past, see, people often also use the idea of karma in previous incarnations to justify wrong behavior at this time. I was caught myself in a difficult situation with one of my guru bhais. One of the marvelous things about a spiritual family is that you haven't always loved each other. or sometimes love gets a little complicated. I don't just mean romantic love, but things get a little complicated. And as Swamiji said, we're a very old spiritual family, and we've been many things to one another. Swamiji writes in his own autobiography about one of the fellow disciples at Mount Washington, this man named Jerry Torgeson. And Jerry just looked at Swami Kriyananda and said, "I don't know why I hate you, but I just hate you," like that. And Swami said to Jerry, "I'm so sorry you feel that way. I don't hate you at all." But Jerry had this fierce feeling that came from who knows what. Well, I had this relationship with this woman where we just could not get along. We had this profound and deep distrust of each other that just was always there. And I was always misreading. I mean, I didn't know I was misreading. I thought I was correctly reading the energy she was putting out to me and me to her, and we were both in our 20s, and it was just a mess. And then one night, oddly, it's the only time this has ever happened, I actually dreamt a previous incarnation. And it was interesting. It was a very traumatic incarnation in which everything that was dear to me was taken away from me by that woman, you know, who had power over me at that time, utterly destroyed my life. Really, literally, that's because these things happen. You read about them in the newspapers, they happen. Interestingly, and this is very significant, that dream started at the end of my life, in which I had entered an ashram or a monastery, and I was completely at peace with what had happened. And I had become a deeply spiritual person because of the trauma. But the trauma was still, and then I went backwards in the life and lived through the trauma. And Swami later said, his words were, "I'm inclined to believe that was a true dream." But all of a sudden, I looked at this woman and I realized that these experiences from hundreds of years ago, just judging from the way the dream looked, it was as if it had happened the day before. I was terrified of her. I was just terrified that she would be able to destroy my life again, even though there wasn't a smidgen of that possibility, but it was completely in me. And then somehow or another, I didn't tell her, but somehow she found out, so she went to a psychic to find out what I had done to her. And got an equally horrific tale, just completely, because of course, when I had my chance to have power over her, I exercised it over her. So now we were really set. And we started in on this little thing, which was basically, you know, holding each other responsible for lifetimes that were long past and justifying our wrong attitude on the basis of all this information. Well, of course I feel this way because in previous lifetimes so-and-so did this to me, and this is how I feel. And Swamiji just pulled us and sat us down. And he said, this was when he said, I'm inclined to believe everything that you all have said is true. But then he looked at us and he said, but neither of you would ever behave like that again. This isn't who you are now. And then all of a sudden this whole different perspective on karma and past lives really popped into my head, which is that we have to live in the present reality. And that a lot of times what karma is doing to us is making us repeat and repeat and repeat the past. That we have to exercise sufficient discipline to be able to say, what is happening right now? And even what is happening right now, what do I want to happen right now? And so karma has to be a liberating fact, not a confining fact. Because if there's one massive unlearned lesson, it is that we are the victims of our lives rather than the powerful, triumphant cause of our life. And that's what the biggest mistake I see about karma is that it makes us passive. And there was a disciple who was, Yogananda was urging upon one of his disciples a certain action. That disciple felt incapable of doing it. And he said, just let me get the words exactly right. "Oh, Master," the disciple said, "you can do this because you're a master." And Yogananda pulled himself up, and then with great power he said, "And what do you think made me a master?" He said, "It was by affirming my strength, not my weakness." So yes, it's our karma to be in a certain reality, but that's just brought to us as an opportunity to say, yeah, there was obviously something in the past that I didn't understand, but now I'm going to learn it. Now I'm going to have the chance to find out. Now I'm going to prove that nothing holds me, that I have the power of the infinite within me. But you see, that's also the way to work with everything. People ask, well, you know, how can I mitigate my bad karma? How can I avoid? Well, by stepping forward and becoming very active in learning the fundamental lesson that all karma wants us to teach us, which is that we are one with the infinite spirit. With God, all things are possible, that we are loved and protected and have nothing to fear. And if we constantly act in that way, then no matter what boomerangs we've sent out, they'll either be burned up by the atmosphere that the positive atmosphere we've created, or else the habit of just responding with this divine confidence will be so great that it'll just be something that happens. Swami Kriyananda has had so many obstacles in his life. And sometimes people will say, "You've had so many problems to overcome." And he just sort of looks up and he says, "Have I?" Like that. And then people will try to enumerate all the things, and he'll just say, "Well, those were just the things that needed to be done." It never crossed his mind that this was, quote, bad karma. It was just the thing that had to be done. And if it had to be done, we just do it. I mean, that's how all karma is resolved. It's just, this is what God has given me to do, and this is what I'll do. This is what I myself set in motion. This is what I committed myself to, and now I get to finish it. I'm so glad I get to finish it. Because if you don't finish it today, you're going to finish it tomorrow. And if you shirk it, it just gets worse. And why? In the end, I'll tell you one more story, then I'll take questions. There was a man who used to run seminars for people who had terminal illnesses, especially people who perhaps had a terminal illness earlier in their life than they expected. And he would have you make 2 lists when you came. The first list was everything that you were going to miss out on because you were going to die sooner than you expected. I'll never see my daughter married. I'll never see my grandchildren. I'll never retire with my husband. I'll never go to France and climb to the top of the Eiffel Tower, whatever it might be. And then the other list was all the difficult things that you're just going to get to skip because you're going to die instead. You're never really going to have to clean out that closet, you know? You're never going to have to deal with this unpleasant relative. You're not going to have to resolve unresolved issues in your marriage, whatever it might be. You're just going to get to skip out. And the actual work in the seminar would be with the second list, because those would be that's really big unfinished business. It's the lessons that I'm still trying to avoid. It was very interesting for me, both when I read that, and also I've been living in the same community, the community that my husband and I developed in Silicon Valley for Ananda. We've been there more than 25 years. I always thought that we would not be there that long, that was the second community that we founded. I kind of thought I'd skip around the planet and found more communities. Some of my friends have done that, but it hasn't turned out that way. And at a certain point, he actually said to us, "I don't really think you're ever going to leave here. I think this is your lifetime assignment. You know, we're going to put your ashes under the elm tree. This is it." And even though I had thought I had accepted that, it was amazing to me when it actually really finally occurred to me that I was never going to live anywhere else. And suddenly, all of these things that in some part of me, I'll use the phrase, I was waiting to be rescued from. I was just putting them off to the side, because I thought somehow I was going to be able to scoot around them. Certain people that I hadn't really opened my heart to, certain situations that seemed too difficult to solve, a corner of the garden where nothing would grow, just everything. But it was amazing to me to suddenly look at my life and just see, every area that I was still hoping to be rescued from. That's what it is to shirk these lessons. We're just waiting to be rescued. Who do we think is going to rescue us? Why would God spare you the opportunity to learn a necessary lesson, to expand your consciousness so you can be more perfectly happy? We're always praying to God to spare us the necessity to learn our lessons. Everyone wants to be well, everyone wants to be healed, but few people actually want to do what is required to make them well. Become one of those. Become the one who's just eager. Oh, I'm most interested in that. Tell me about it. Or feel it in your own heart. Oh, look, I'm still hiding from this reality. When I thought of those two lists that the man made, I thought, well, let me see. If I were going to die next year, what would be on my list? But I was very pleased to realize that my belief in karma and reincarnation had become so deep, I couldn't put anything on that list. Because this life, next life, what's the difference? It just doesn't make any difference. You're going to have to face it. To me, that's been a very powerful incentive. If I try to skip it now, it's just going to return. It's going to be as much of an unpleasantness then as it is now. In fact, worse, because it's been pushed aside and the fear of it will have grown in my mind. But if we face bravely, God, that's the whole purpose of our life. God is there. He'll help us. Is it easy? No. Is it simple? Yes. So it's a great deal of difference. We think if it's not easy, it must be complicated. No, it's really very simple. This is here for my personal growth. If I devote myself with faith in God, put one step in front of the other, it will resolve. And then when it's resolved, it'll be really resolved. If I hide over here, it'll just rear its ugly head again and again and again and again and just have this endless tiresomeness of it. Oh, let me give you one more image. This was in my head a minute ago and I lost it. People tend to think of karma in a very linear way, as if the edge of the stage were striped. And now I have the karma of not having any money, now that's resolved. Now I have the karma of not having any children, now that's resolved. Now I have the karma of, whatever it might be, not having a nice home, now I have a nice home, like this. And we just think like this, and then it's over, like that. The really unpleasant actual experience is that we kind of keep meeting the same things again and again. The way karma, you really have to understand it. This is completely just an image. It's a vertical pole. And that vertical pole has stripes. And each of those stripes represent some aspect of karma. Self-confidence, the ability to love unpleasant people, belief in God's will, money magnetism, lack of money magnetism. And they're vertical stripes of many different colors, but they're not even. It's not done with a ruler. They're widely varied. They stretch out really wide like that, and then they get really, really skinny, almost hair thin, seem to disappear, and then they bloop out again like that. So the pattern is quite fluid, but it's all vertical. And our life and lives is a spiral staircase going around and around and around that pole, steadily upward, but not necessarily at a very steep angle. And the whole time we're circling, our karma's on one side. So we'll come to the karma of lack of self-confidence for a particular reason, then we'll get to the edge of that stripe, and we'll enter into maybe a very good period in which everything goes really well, and maybe that's a really skinny stripe, so we just get past it for a little while, and then we'll keep on going around. So the karmic periods seem to shift, but we don't realize that they're vertical. And then so we keep coming around and we meet it again, and we meet it again, and we meet it again. And eventually they do stop. Not everyone goes the whole length, will really finish it. But it always makes me really nervous when someone says, I have overcome that karma. I always prefer to say, for now. You know, I've overcome the test, I've faced it bravely, let's see what comes next. Because also that determination that it's behind us is also often indication of a little fear about it. You know, because fear about it is karma itself. If you're afraid of it, in fact, Swami said once, anything that you fear is karma that is left to be faced. That's a pretty powerful statement. Anything that you fear is karma that is left to be faced. So that's one of the primary reactions we have to work against, is the fear. And the antidote to that is faith in God. If He sends it to me, He will also send me the power to overcome it. And that's the generic answer to every karmic problem. If He sends it to me, He will also send me the power to overcome it. What do I have to fear? That's what He wants us to know. So, questions, thoughts, comments? Yes, Kuldeep?
It's exactly similar to something like that you said about a friend there, where, I mean, you could not get together, or, I mean, you had a dream and the problem was coming from the past. Like, something like that is happening with me also. And probably the other person's been at it for 25 years or more and trying to block me every time or do some harm or other thing. How do I overcome this, or how do I resolve this now?
On a very practical level, what I have found really works is I try to ask myself I try to be very, very attentive to what is actually happening right now. And I also try to be very attentive because often a karmic conflict like that is based on a remembrance of someone having power over you, in which they could really hurt you. And so you ask yourself whether or not there is any actual jeopardy to my well-being. There may be jeopardy to my convenience, my preferences, but am I actually in any kind of jeopardy in this situation? Of course, we never are if we take refuge in God. But I find if I just hold myself steady in the thought, God, if you're sending this to me, then you have a reason, and I have nothing to fear. And and then the other thing that I found very helpful is when I have an antagonism with someone, I don't excessively put myself in proximity to them. I should say in the past, because this is not my reality anymore. But as much as possible, I try to serve them. I try to give. I try to give love, I try to give service, I try to give support. Sometimes you have to do that from a distance and from the background, but that would be the opposite of giving antagonism. And the other thing you have to do is you just have to be very patient. And sometimes you personally are over it, but they're not. And you just have to live through it. You have to live through the residual effects of your own bad actions. Just be very peaceful about it. Does that help at all?
Yes, and there's another thing connected with it. I mean, are the karmas also connected astrologically?
Well, it's more the other way. It's that your astrology is a reflection. Your karma is your karma is not caused by your horoscope. Mars does not take an unpleasant interest in you and begin showering you with problems. But the pattern of the chakras and the horoscope, let me try to say this accurately, it's in the Raja Yoga book, but each of the chakras corresponds to signs of the zodiac. You read the horoscope, but the horoscope is telling you what's in the chakras. And the reason that you can predict from the planetary placements what's going to happen is because you choose the moment to be born in which the planets are a perfect reflection of your karma, of your chakras, and the karma that's in your chakras. The planets are not causing it. Your karma is causing your horoscope. And so the astrologer can read the horoscope and predict your karma, but it's not caused by the horoscope, it's the opposite. Everything in this world is a symbol of the inner reality, not the other way around. Okay. So if they say this is a bad planetary period for you, what they're telling you is that you have karmic obstacles that are inherent that are going to express during this period of time. Yeah. Okay? Any other questions or thoughts?
What is better, ambition or contentment?
If contentment is actually a synonym for passivity or low energy, then ambition is much better. But much of the time, ambition is God implanted because it's necessary for us to have experiences so that we can learn lessons. And sometimes to resist our own ambition does not actually expand our consciousness. It just traps us in a false idea of what it means to be egoless. So if you look at the life of Yogananda or the life of Kriyananda, by any standard you would have to say they were extraordinarily ambitious in what they committed themselves to and what they have accomplished, both of them. But the ambition was to do a righteous work that would serve others. So that's actually how you work with ambition. It's not whether or not you're ambitious, it's to what cause have you committed your ambition? Because generally speaking, those who have no ambition are not more advanced spiritually. They're generally speaking simply lower energy. But that may mean they don't have much external, in a positive sense, you may not have much external ambition, but you have deep internal ambition, which is that you're full energy in favor of your consciousness, and maybe that doesn't have to express in a whole lot of outward work. But you need at all times, in order to progress spiritually, to be working at the absolute limit of your capacity in all areas of your life. And if you're not, one should think about doing so. Otherwise you just get to reincarnate a whole lot more, because it just takes a lot longer. And for most people, that's not a very happy prospect. But experience is your teacher. A very worldly Western woman who was very wealthy and was really enjoying her wealth, her nephew was involved in Ananda, and she got some tiny little glimpse of these kind of teachings. She called him up. She just heard about reincarnation. Guess what? We get to come back. That was her response. Well, from her point of view, that's how she saw it. What can we say? But it's not such a terrible thing to come back either, in the sense of, if you're deeply engaged, expanding your consciousness, you'll just do what you have to do until you're done, that's all. But the joy of doing that, even if there's suffering also, you just keep doing it until it's done. And one of the big karmic lessons many people have to learn is to put out energy and to be ambitious for expanded consciousness. And a lot of what people will call bad karma is just something that totally upsets the comfort of the situation and requires an enormous output of energy that they might not have wanted to put out. And then we'll call it bad karma. But often you're just being kicked out of a complacency that you might have called contentment, but was really just a sinking of energy. So that's the answer. It's a little more nuanced. Okay? Yes?
You explained so wonderfully that what you put out comes back. And you also clarified that when you're interpreting your unlearned lessons, you may need to defy some conventions in search of truth. So when you do that, do you not put out energy against somebody when defying conventions and it comes back to you?
It's a very good question. When you're defying someone in the name of truth, are you just creating more bad karma? Karma is created by the intention of the heart and not by the reactions of other people. That's a very important point. I did something where somebody got really upset with me, which was totally not my intention. And that person complained to Swamiji about what I had done, and Swami came to talk to me about it. I said, Swami, that just, first of all, that isn't what happened. And then he sort of comforted me. He said, God reads the heart. Don't worry about it. He said very seriously, you are responsible for your intentions. You are not responsible for how people may take what you do. So for example, if somebody's strongly opposed to an action that you know is right for you, if you are angry at them and are acting in defiance of them and are indifferent to their suffering, then you will have some karma for that. If you just simply recognize that this is an unfortunate side effect of your right action, but don't allow malice or anger to grow, then no, you don't really get much or any. Entirely depends on what's going on in your heart, which is an enormous comfort. This is where the principle, where there is dharma, there is victory, which is an Ananda principle. It's a principle of our community, is extremely important. Because if you are behaving, and dharma I would define in this way, is though that action which expands your consciousness and draws you closer to God. It's not duty, because duty is often socially defined. This is what if you are actually acting, at least even sincerely, and even if it turns out that you're misguided, but if you are sincerely acting to expand your consciousness and to draw closer to God, then it will all work out in the end. Maybe those people will come around, maybe they won't, but everything will come out the way it ought to be. I sometimes say, sometimes you just have to almost just blank out everything else, and like you were living in a vacuum, and just do the right thing without any idea of where it's going to take you. Because you know that if you just step by step are doing the right thing, then in the end it will come out all right. You may have to go through a lot of fire before you get there. I wrote a letter to a woman once who, she was telling me that she was being forced to marry someone she didn't love. I said, you're not being forced to marry someone you don't love. I said, you're choosing to do so, because to not do so would be very inconvenient. Yeah, because you would upset a lot of people around you. You would, whatever the circumstances were, but be very honest about it. You're an adult person. You can walk out the door. Nobody makes you do anything. You choose it because of the alternative to it. But it's very important in your heart, as much as you can, to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And then you're not confused. You may even say, I don't have the courage to stand up to this situation, so even though I would like to, I'm not going to. But then you know exactly what you're doing. And you just keep moving until you do have the courage. Because God is no tyrant. This is what we have to understand. He loves us. He's our mother. You know, he really, think how sympathetic our mothers are to us, how wonderfully loving our mothers can be. Because they just understand. They've had us since we were little teeny things. And they know that we mean well, but sometimes we can't do it right. And the same way that a mother just holds a child, that's how God holds us all the time. And so even if we're just weeping on Divine Mother's lap, saying, I just couldn't do it. I wanted to, but I couldn't. It's fine. It'll come out all right. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Pastor actually talked about group karma and country karma and all.
Oh, yeah.
So you can actually take responsibility at times for your own karma, but what is the best way to actually not attract something of the society or see things happening which are not correct outside? How do you resolve that kind of karma?
Now we're talking about not personal karma. I'm repeating it for the sake of the recording. Of national, cultural, all that karma. Okay. Of course, we incarnate into a situation in which the societal karma, the national, cultural karma, is the appropriate karma for what we also need to learn personally. Everything is a tapestry in which all the threads interweave the way they're supposed to. You wouldn't be born into a situation if you didn't have some relationship to it. Now, whatever that relationship might be, whether it's to endure it or to escape it. I've met a number of South Africans, for example, who just, their country was, especially before the more recent developments, they just fled. They just couldn't bear the apartheid and the abuse that was taking place. They just walked away from it. They couldn't do it. I've met Israelis who've just left because they just can't deal with it. And that wasn't necessarily the wrong decision. It was just, I need to look at this and I need to realize this isn't my karma. I'm just going to walk away from this. It doesn't matter if I've been born into it. So that's two sides, which is we choose it, and then we have to decide what the appropriate relationship is to it. But we also have to understand that this world creates, this planet at this time has lots of different pockets of different kind of karma, and this planet is not meant to, it's not meant to work. It's not meant to all come together. It's early Dwapara Yuga, it's not advanced Satya Yuga, it's not a perfect planet. It's meant to be, well, the word I was about to use is a torture chamber. It's meant to be a place in which things don't work. It's the material plane. When I was talking to Swami Kriyananda once, I don't know what we were talking about, but I said something about, you know, maybe the next time we, meaning our whole karmic family, incarnate, we could just come in at a higher yuga instead of this one. Swami's first response was, I do not intend to incarnate again at all. He actually had his mouth full of sandwich and did not finish chewing before he said that. He said it really strongly and emphatically. But then he said, even in the highest age on this planet, he said it's still the material plane. We're still in a material body and we still have the job of realizing God. So there's no satisfaction on the material plane. People think that we can bring heaven down to earth, but earth is not heaven. Heaven is God realization. And whatever situation we're in, God realization is the only objective. He said in higher ages, though, just to finish that conversation, in higher ages, though, he said, people like us are in charge. And I said, so like the whole world is one like the Ananda community? He said, yes. So, I mean, that's pleasant to think of. But he said, still, you're unsatisfied in your heart. Oneness with God is the only answer. So we're not necessarily intended to do anything about what's going on around us unless you really feel in your own heart that you were born for that. But merely because it's going on around you doesn't mean it has anything to do with you. You have your own personal destiny to work out, your own dharma, those actions which will bring you closer to God, which will take place in the context of where you're standing. But whether or not it has any relationship to where you incarnated is an entirely individual matter. In principle, there's no reason why it needs to. One thing I've enjoyed enormously, especially in Delhi, but in all over India, is how many people many of you don't really seem to have any culture. I mean, excuse me, in fact, that sounded terrible. You don't necessarily belong to any particular culture. I'm more used to that in America because we have no culture, you know. But just everybody's looking like a world citizen. People could be from so many different locales. Now that's the other answer, you see. Ultimately, we've been in every culture, everybody, every race, every religion, and after a time, we no longer identify with the one we've chosen. We identify instead with our own individual magnetism and our own personal destiny, and that's what I see in so many of you that I've met. You're living in a particular place, but you have not allowed it to define you. And that's really what we're doing now also, because that's how to separate yourself from the mass karma around you. You don't want to just be a bubble on the ocean, just getting swept along with whatever happened. There's a remarkable story that Swami tells repeatedly. When America dropped those atomic bombs, and I don't know which city it was, in Hiroshima, no, but I mean, I don't know which of the two cities that were bombed, but in one of them, two religious communities, a Jesuit, Hiroshima, they were in the middle of the destroyed zone, but they were not destroyed because the magnetic karma, the magnetism of those religious people just separated themselves out to such an astonishing degree that it bordered on a miracle. And that's exactly what we need to do. We need to be so powerfully moved by our attunement with God that whatever's the social context is, it's just merely the background for our individual destiny, which is another reason why ambition of a certain kind is very important. We must be very ambitious to have a very dynamic consciousness. Otherwise, we just get swept along. Master said something that's very confusing. He said, if an airplane crashes and everybody dies, it may not have been everybody's karma to die, but some of the people may not have had enough karma to live to resist the mass karma. And you hear stories of that. I was supposed to be on the plane, but I got a flat tire. There was a case of a woman in our community. Her mother was coming to visit from Chicago to California, and the girl called up her mom and said, you know, this just isn't a good time to come. Why don't you not come now? Mother said, well, I have all my tickets. It's all set. She said, no, it's just not a good time. So she was a little annoyed. She canceled her tickets, and that plane went down and everyone was killed. But her daughter just, for no particular reason, but her individual karma was strong enough that she stepped outside of it. And when you're strongly connected like that, then you don't even think about it. You don't worry anymore. You know you're on your own stream. And whatever's going on around you will go on around you, but it won't define you. And that's among the many unlearned lessons, is to just be who we are and, you know, be interested, but only relate to it as we feel it from inside, not as it's tried to be imposed upon us. Does that make sense? Yes?
It's in continuous to what we're talking, that, you know, we're in a material plane, and you know, it's a conflict which we have at times, because we live a professional life and we live a personal life.
Right.
So professionally, we work for 10, 12 hours a day, and at times we are forced to take actions, and we're in a channel of taking decisions and forcing actions which personally we may not agree upon. So how do you resolve that conflict when you come back home and you look back at your day and say, you know, this was something which should not have happened, but I was a channel or I did it?
When you may not agree with something, there's many levels of not agreeing. It could be, you know, a foolish business decision forced upon you by your boss. It could be a completely immoral action that somebody's trying to ask you to do. Obviously, there's a huge difference between the two. And Swami Kriyananda's written a marvelous course, Material Success and Happiness Through Yogic Principles. And he talks a great deal, and I urge that course upon you. It's a fabulous course in which he really talks about how to be practical in your idealism in the real world. And he wrote it when he first came to India, because so many Indians spoke to him about the choices that they had to make, and sometimes they felt that they were being forced to make choices that were not dharmic. And Swami really wanted to try to address that issue from a yogic point of view. So the answer is a big answer. But I'll give you another little piece of it, which is there's no experience in life that is outside the will of God. There's no time when we have less of a relationship with God than any other time. So if we feel that part of our life is material, it isn't really. It's that we have begun to think of it as material because it's dealing with the material world. We always have the quality of our consciousness. And that the quality of our consciousness may be easier to maintain when you're sitting in your puja room, but that just means that the challenge that you're facing is to maintain the quality of your consciousness when nobody else around you is doing so, and when the circumstances seem contrary to refined consciousness. But that could in fact be the entire karmic lesson here, which is how to be an instrument of my own higher consciousness at all times in all circumstances. Just as it happened on a couple of days ago when I was in Noida, they asked me to talk about the 8 manifestations of God, and I talked about them in terms of how perfect they are as a daily practice, because whatever circumstance you're in, one of those 8 aspects of God is going to be relevant. Joy, calmness, peace, love, power, energy, light, sound, wisdom. I think I got them all. And so sometimes, you know, love is really not appropriate, but calmness is. Sometimes peace is not appropriate, but energy is appropriate. You know, sometimes you can hardly start singing a bhajan, but you can behave very wisely. And if you start really looking at those 8 manifestations, you'll find in every circumstance of your life, you can attune yourself to a higher vibration, and no matter how mundane the action may be, you may do it as an instrument of superconscious intelligence and of your own uplifted self. The fact of the matter is you will also be much more successful. Because the spiritual world rules the material world. We think the material world takes us away from the spiritual, but the spiritual world is the more powerful. So the more you are connected to the spiritual world, the more you act in the spiritual world, in the material world from the spiritual world, the more power you have over the material world. So even from the point of view of sheer worldly success, you're much more likely to have it if you can turn your understanding of your everyday life into the understanding that it's not separate from your higher life. Now, the techniques for that are this course that he gave. If you can get his written course, just as it happens, I also gave like a year of classes on that course because it was so powerful, and you can go right to the internet, you can download those for free. And I was just fascinated going through that course, every step of it. And you could just see, because you see, Swami Kriyananda was 36 years old. He'd been a monk in YSS Self-Realization Fellowship for 14 years, from the age of 22. At the age of 36, fully committed Swami in the order. He was expelled from that order by the board of directors. The story is interesting, but not relevant, because at the age of 36, he was separated from everyone he knew. He was forbidden to contact anybody he knew in any country. He was thrown out of India, where he was at the time. He was separated from all his brothers and sisters. He didn't have one penny. He'd been a monk for 14 years. He went home to his parents and lived in their back bedroom. And from that, he created everything. And I think I wrote in the introduction, did I write it in the introduction, or I wrote it in the advertising? If he had worked for himself, it would have been one of the greatest rags to riches story in the world. But in fact, he generated it all for the good of others. So you don't really think of him as a billionaire type. But in fact, the spiritual world has mastery over the material world. And even if you're just looking for money, that's the way to get it. You know, India used to be the richest country in the, it was fabled for its riches because there was this integration of the spiritual and the material. And then this may be fanciful on my part, but when the English came in, the Indians hid their teachings, because it was bad enough that England was raping the country for all its resources, but they didn't want them to take their teachings too, so they hid them. And now that India is coming up again, truthfully, I think Swamiji put that course back out because this culture understands that the spiritual rules the material, but that information has been lost. And people are behaving undharmically and thinking that that's going to work. But that's a huge error and is not India's true contribution to the world. So I think it's very important. You all have a responsibility to understand this, to be both wealthy and dharmic, because this is a higher age. That's where we're going. Yes.
You see, if karma is going to happen anyway, it's not good or it's not bad, then what role does compassion play in this? Because you help somebody, you're not necessarily doing something.
I know, that's what everyone says. Let me try to sort that one out. Why would you help someone? Because it's just their karma anyway. Because you need to become godlike in your self-expression, and the divine is entirely compassionate. It's everything that you do because it's the right thing to do. Because when you see someone suffering and you have the capacity to alleviate their suffering, it expands your consciousness to take their reality into account and to expand your self-definition to include them. And it's not about whether they're helped or not helped, it's about you. And I mean, that question, when I hear it, let me just sit with it for a minute, because everybody knows in their own heart that of course you should help them. It's like a trick question. No, I know you don't mean it as that, but it is a trick question in the sense that nobody who just says, oh, well, it's just his karma to die in the ditch, I could feed him, but I think I won't. Nobody really feels that that's the right way to behave, because it violates your own inner nature and you know it right away. But it could be your karma to pay back to this person. You just have to expand your own consciousness in all circumstances. The Gita talks about nishkam karma. You don't do it for the results, you do it because it's the right thing to do. You do the best you can, you leave the results to God. You're not interfering by acting like that, you're interfering by not acting, because it's your divine opportunity to be an instrument for higher consciousness, and if you reject that, you're contracting yourself. And whenever you contract yourself, you're not moving in the direction that you're supposed to move. Everybody comes together for a purpose, and if you share, and that purpose is to experience greater and greater sense of divinity. And anything you do that contracts your heart, even on the basis of, well, it's his karma, but then it's your karma to have failed the opportunity to serve. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at our personal magnetism in this. I'm going to actually try to do better with that one. I'm suffering from the I'm suffering from the 5 minutes to 9 o'clock syndrome, which is, there's a better answer to that question, and I need to find it. And I think it's somewhere in there, because I don't feel satisfied. I honestly feel like I'm just trying to get you to go away, which is not personal. I'm trying to get the question to go away. But I have to really find a better answer to it, and I don't think that it's within me right now. So tomorrow, let's start with it. Fair enough. Okay? I think that may be the end of this evening. When I have a question I'm completely baffled by, I better stop. Yes?
Just one word. Master says actually that karma is not exactly a fixed thing that can be transformed. So it could be that the person who is going to be helped by that person with some passion is living a transformation of his own karma for who knows what reasons. So there is also this factor.
Yes.
Master said karma can be transformed. Indeed, in his own karma there would have been 3 marriages, but out of the power of his desire for God, that was completely changed.
It was completely changed.
In the case of the person for whom we feel compassion, if it's not happening in that moment, a transformation of the karma of that person.
See, there you have it. And yes, you can't say that good is not going to come of it. Yeah, that's the answer. Okay. God bless you all. Thank you very much.